necessarily going in the direction that I want, or I'm not seeing many people, accepting it, or etc. Is the problem in my niyyah? Is the problem in the skill? At the end, we always have to have that ikhlas. This is something that whether it's working or whether it's not working, let me say, in reaching out to the audience, at the end, you always have to work on your ikhlas. But just because you're not seeing people coming in, it doesn't mean that you've got a problem with your ikhlas. So don't get turned off. This is important. Not because you're not seeing, that this acceptance and people coming in, it doesn't mean your ikhlas is actually not in place. That's subhanallah. That's it. Rabbil Alameen, you never know. A lot of the work that was done by a lot of ulama wasn't famous until they died. It wasn't known. These people were just people that no one knew about until they had died. After their death is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically somehow brought it up into the surface, because وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ, the good amal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates it. So just put that intention in place and remember, وَاحْذَرْهُمْ أَن يَفْتِنُوكَ عَنْ بَعْضِ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ. And don't let their pressure, don't let somehow the fitna or getting that intimidation that if I would change this, if I would get into maybe somehow not being too strict about it and etc. And you might get intimidated that let me change Islam, let me change something. Well, anyways, one scholar says this, so perhaps it wouldn't be such a big deal. And then without you realizing, it seems like, hey, I'm going to be getting more audience, and that's going to be an evidence of success, and that it's the right thing to do. In Islam, no, the ends do not justify the means. In Islam, no, the ends don't justify the means. The ends and the means, they go together. They go together. It has to be through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not because we see many of those, coming in, bringing in, somehow publicity and gaining all that. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's a sign of success and that, hey, this is the right way to do it. And at the end, فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُصِيبَهُم بِبَعْضِ ذُنُوبِهِمْ. They want to turn away. They don't want to listen. They are turned off. They don't want talab al-ilm. They don't want to, be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. بالأخير, at the end, فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا, they want to turn around. فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُصِيبَهُم بِبَعْضِ ذُنُوبِهِمْ. Don't bend the religion. Don't bend the religion to their likes, and say what is. Do your homework, and at the end, Allahumma hal ballaght. You want to keep in mind that you had prophets that would only come with one, with none, with 11, with 10, with very few people, and many. That's basically, hey, if prophets, you look at Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, many years. Are we going to say that Prophet Nuh just didn't use the right method, didn't use the right way of reaching out to the hearts, that he was somehow just turning off people from accepting the da'wah? Certainly not. Certainly he was using the best method. What about Prophet Lut alayhi salam? Certainly he was using the best method. But you just have to keep in mind that there are certain times where even if you had the best method in teaching, and even if you had the full ikhlas, the people themselves, they don't want it. At the end, you continue. أَفَحُكْمَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ يَبْغُونَ وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ مِنَ اللَّهِ حُكْمًا لِقَوْمٍ يُوقِنُونَ. At the end, many, of course, they're going to want al-jahiliyyah. They don't want haqq. At the end, there's no better rule. Just lay out حكم الله سبحانه وتعالى. Just lay out the words. Just say, Ya Rabb, I'm doing this for your sake. You're the one that puts barakah. Ya Rabb, Allahumma shahad. Allahumma hal ballaght. That's it. At the end, you just want to get to Jannah. You just want to get to Jannah. I'm doing the job. Ya Rabb, witness that I'm just doing this for your sake. That's it. And keep going. Don't get turned off. Just keep going. And at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will elevate. Our work is not dependent on how people would accept the da'wah. Our work is dependent on how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the da'wah, not how people accept it. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts it. That's it.
Yeah, but the da'wah depend upon too much lie. It's not a da'wah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, the da'wah.
Yeah. I don't want to say anything in the class. Out of the class, I can talk to you.
Inshallah. All right. يا أيها الذين آمنوا. We're going to continue right here. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض. Now, of course, yesterday we did actually talk about a number of different things. Let's really summarize it right there. وقفينا على أثرهم بعيسى ابن مريم مصدقا لما بين يديه من التوراة وآتيناه الإنجيل فيه هدى ونور. So we did actually go, let's really just, right there, and we talked about a number of different things and highlighted so many different issues. And part of the issues that we had highlighted is really these key words in where hudan and nur, there was guidance and light, and certainly al-maw'idha, that these different items, al-huda, al-nur, and al-maw'idha, were actually what was key within that da'wah, within, of course, the revelation itself, and that the center was supposed to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the person's vision, centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their action, in recognizing, of course, guidance, centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even in what the proselytize, al-maw'idha, in the words themselves. All of that is key in order to bring about that enlightenment. And certainly a number of different key words that we looked at here, which is one, in muttaqin, coming into the opposite of muttaqi is basically a person that is fasiq, because a person that is muttaqi is basically a person that is shielding themselves with basically, let's say, keeping distance from the different spiritual denouncers. When we say spiritual denouncers, we're talking about what the person's gazing at, what the person is listening to, what the person is basically surrounding themselves with. All of those areas can be spiritual denouncers, in where when we're speaking about al-muttaqin, that's the way to keep yourself protected, shielded, and certainly with a massive armor. The higher and the more precious your iman to you is, certainly you're going to be shielding yourself and putting more armors around you in order to give you the protection for your deen. In contrast to the fasiqeen, in where a person that is fasiq, they would be letting themselves on the loose, in where certainly when we say letting themselves on the loose, they're living a free style with no armor. So they're basically right there letting their eye loose, their ears loose, and their hearing loose, the people that they hang out with. It kind of feels during that moment as if it was somehow giving them some sort of freedom, some sort of dopamine, some sort of entertainment and happiness, without them realizing it would actually take them elsewhere, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word that they habitat أعمالهم. Look at the word حبطت, even though it's actually on the other page, but here we go in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says حبطت أعمالهم فأصبحوا خاسرين. I want you to look at this one. We're going to get there inshallah, but when we look at that حبطت أعمالهم, it's actually key. You know, ironically, or maybe I shouldn't be saying ironically, but I would say interestingly, okay, in where habitat, the word habita, the root of this word, actually has another meaning, in where, yes, certainly, habitat actually means that their deeds were basically, I guess, they lost them. They basically did not get what they had expected, etc. So it was in complete loss. But there's another word for habita. The other word for habita is when an animal eats foods that is actually not their type of food. In other words, it's not actually good for them. So let's say we're talking about herbivore animals. They're probably eating perhaps foods that were mixed with meats and etc. And we remember the mad cows and all of that. And or perhaps eating different substances that probably got them perhaps infected. And then there are certain illnesses in where the cow, for example, it's eating the wrong things, and then it gets so bloated that in order for you to remove that bloating piece of it, they would really have to do this incision in its gut to remove all the gases that were trapped in its own gut. So that's really what habita means, in where to the person that is looking at the cow or that animal, they would think that it's actually eating healthy. Look, it's fat, it's getting bigger, it's eating well, and it would seem to the outsider that it's going the right direction. When in reality, what is actually happening is that more and more gases, let's call it things that are not healthy, are actually getting trapped inside, and then it's going to come back at them. And that's why habitat a'maluhum. It just gets trapped inside, it locks them, and then it's what will come back in where to get them sick. فَأَصْبَحُوا خَاسِرِينَ. Then what they will eventually live into is nothing but failure and loss. So just keeping that in mind, in where when we're speaking about al-fasiq would let themselves on the loose, not choosing wisely what they're supposed to be consuming or what they're supposed to be taking in, whether we're speaking about what they're looking at, whether we're talking about the environment, the people they're surrounding themselves with, all of these different things, they might actually think that, hey, it's giving me the happiness that I want. And without them realizing, it's actually going to be bloating them with different things when they won't really realize until they get completely sick, or perhaps their life goes completely wrong. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us what is key to keeping them on track is basically أنزلنا إليك الكتاب بالحق, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically told us that, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed the book, in other words, the revelation, with it containing the truth. And certainly this traces back all the way to the different prophets, in where على آثارهم, it was tracing back the step from one step to another, from one prophet to another, until it got to the Prophet ﷺ, and at the end, keeping in mind muhaiminan or muhaimanan عليه, in where what was actually contained in the Quran, and this is the word al-kitab, was actually speaking about, of course, at least this al-kitab, anzalna ilayka al-kitab, this is the Quran, in where the Quran was abrogating all the previous revelations, and therefore having the shir'ah and the minhaj, having in where it had a legislature, and it also had, let's call it systemic legislations, in where it was containing all the systems, containing different legislations that were supposed to be supporting, one, justice within the society, let's call it stability within the individual, and certainly peace at a universal level. So when you're looking at shiratan wa minhaja, you can't just talk about one sharia in general, but you also have to have a complete system that supports one another. And at the end, of course, what does that mean? فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. You need to, I believe yesterday I said فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ as well. So فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ is basically right there in where it's an imperative verb telling you, hey, what you really need to be seeking, which is that alif sin ta, what you really need to be seeking is really rushing for what is good, whether we're speaking about al-khayrat to mean inclusive, whether in worship, whether in commitment, in talab al-ilm, consistency, all of that, that's fastabiqul khayrat, and then rush into that. Even, of course, it's part of our nature that we want to seek, of course, some form of competition. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, that's what you should be competing in that type of good. إِلَى اللَّهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ جَمِيعًا. For your return is all to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just keep that in mind. Don't necessarily rush getting al-khair in this dunya and thinking, well, I had prayed for a long time. I don't see that I'm getting light or miracles. I'm not getting anything. Because remember, don't rush al-khair now. Al-khair is actually ilallahi marji'ukum jami'a. The real khair is coming in Jannah. That's the real khair. That's the ultimate khair. What some of the khair that you might get in this dunya as a result of perhaps piety, as a result of good things that you had invested, etc., that's part of the khair, and that's ajil bushra al-mu'min. That's basically, let's say, the expedited, I guess, perhaps bushra. What is al-bushra? Al-bushra is actually a glad tidings. Al-mu'min is basically, sometimes you can be getting some expedited rewards, but don't rush in getting everything now. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, إِلَى اللَّهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ جَمِيعًا. Your return is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ فِيهِ تَخْتَلِفُونَ. And at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell you, will inform you, and certainly you'll be held accountable. That is right there, and you'll be held accountable for everything that you had done. And then right there in this ayah, وَأَنِحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. So now that you realize all the previous things and where the influence of huda and the impact of nur, and certainly the impact of the good word that you might say, now to finalize the theme, وَأَنِحْكُمْ. Now your duty, and just say what is what the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and what is the rulings of Allah, what are the rulings of Allah. Just say the truth, and وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ. Don't follow their whims. Don't bend the truth to their likings. At the end, وَاحْذَرْهُمْ أَن يَفْتِنُوكَ. And be careful, be vigilant, and be, of course, aware, because they might pressure you that you need to change this. This is what you need to add. This is in order to basically bend the religion to their likes. And فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا. If they don't want to basically accept that, and فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا, they want to return, they want to leave, just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُصِيبَهُم بِبَعْضِ ذُنُوبِهِم, that basically going to be right there, given the free will to basically apply what they want to apply. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, whatever the person behaves in, whatever they do, it basically starts affecting them, and it basically will come back to them. وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. Whoever does wrong, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically hold them accountable, and that will come back in retrospect. It will come back in the same direction. وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنَ النَّاسِ لَفَاسِقُونَ. Majority of the people, just keep in mind, are actually fasiqun, in where, what is it, fasiqun, in where, yes, they choose certain behaviors, they choose certain, let's say, being on the loose. So don't get intimidated to basically go their life in their direction and their practices. أَفَحُكْمَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ يَبْغُونَ. Are they then? Well, majority are basically seeking to apply al-jahiliyyah. Now, taking it from there, of course, it takes us, well, what actually acts as this area to ground us into recognizing al-haq, into applying al-haq, into applying the ilm in our life. It basically is coming in where لِقَوْمِ يُوقِنُونَ. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ حُكْمًا مِنَ اللَّهِ وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ مِنَ اللَّهِ حُكْمًا لِقَوْمٍ يُوقِنُونَ. Who actually realizes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the best rulings, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rulings basically are superior to all rulings? It's really the person that reached a level of yaqeen. It's really a person that reached and went beyond in those stages, from taking the stage of ilm al-yaqeen to going into the stage of ayn al-yaqeen and then haqq al-yaqeen. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of consistency, a lot of commitment, in where talab al-ilm is extremely important, because that's how you would get your ilm al-yaqeen in place, the certainty in where you won't be capable of getting into that certainty unless you basically took the time. One, for talab al-ilm requires hifz, requires memorization. Talab al-ilm requires a lot of istima', requires a lot of listening. Just like the Salihin used to say, أول العلم الاستماع, and then الحفظ. The first thing that you would start with seeking ilm is basically first to listen, because the more you listen, the more you're capable of carrying on and knowing where others had left off, and then you're capable of continuing what they did not manage to continue. So in that situation with talab al-ilm, it gives you certainty, it gives you that awareness, and certainly it takes away a lot of the murkiness, the blurry vision, and the blurry areas and blurry paths. Removes it, and the only way to remove it is with ilm. Which is what? Which is al-huda and the nur. Al-huda is basically only to be found in revelation. You're not going to be finding huda unless you actually go back to يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسُ وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. When we're speaking about ilm, it's not necessarily found in speculation, and I'll think about it in just deeper thinking and deeper ponderance. No, al-ilm and the true ilm is actually found in al-huda, in al-wahi, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent al-wahi in order to let and help people find guidance and help those that want to go higher than, let's call it, the common and the majority of the people wanting guidance, but then sorry, not the majority of the people wanting guidance, but al-huda is for the majority of the people to help them find guidance, but in nur is more specific to a certain number in a smaller group of people that are actually seeking a higher level of, let's call it deeper ilm and deeper level of certainty. So that's within Nur. All right. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض. Now, this is important to guess connected with the previous ayah, in where the previous ayah was laying out, of course, telling us right there in where وَأَنَحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ, you're going to rule and just rule by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically taught you, and don't bend the truth in order to basically let them somehow feel intimidated to join it. At the end, truth is what needs to be said regardless of what people think of it. Now, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us into Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu right there, continuing with the same idea. وَنِحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. Just he was directing his words at the Prophet ﷺ, say what the truth is, and regardless of how people accept it, at the end, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, directing the words at the believers, لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء. Don't take. Now the word تتخذوا, what does the word تتخذوا mean? So the word تتخذوا, اتخذ, actually means to take. But this isn't talking about necessarily just taking and where I'm taking someone in a certain direction. This is basically to tell us in where how many would relate and take some form of a close relationship, and without them realizing, they're basically making them be their place of direction. All right, so this is الاتخاذ. لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء, in where what many will not realize is that they are actually taking this special relationship with the Yahud wal Nasara, but are actually losing the relationship between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says right there, and what we're going to do, we're actually going to go for al-wali. Now, because this is actually talking about al-wali, and we need to actually, right there, let's see this one. Let's look at the A, and then we're going to get to this page. So what is the word awliya? The word awliya, it actually came in and comes in often in the Quran. So if we're not going to be taking al-Yahud, the Jews and the Christians, as awliya, let's just use the word right now really quick, and then we'll go in a deeper level. Don't take the Jews and the Christians as your place of authority, as your place of decision making, as your place of support. بعضهم أولياء بعض, for they are supporters of one another. In other words, they consider and they take themselves as the ones to support one another, but وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُم مِّنكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. Whoever takes them as their authority, as their decision making, as their place of support, then he's actually part of them. For the Lord Almighty, verily the Lord Almighty does not guide those that are transgressors. فَتَرَى الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِم مَرَضٌ. On the other hand, you will see those that had illnesses in their hearts. What type of illness? We're actually talking about a spiritual heart illness there. How would they react? Well, يُسَارِعُونَ فِيهِمْ. They would rush somehow to gain some kind of privilege through them. And then you would hear them, they're at least not necessarily literally saying, because remember, there's lisanul hal and there's lisanul maqal. Lisanul hal is that they're not necessarily saying, but that's what their, let's call it their stance is basically speaking in itself. They're not saying it verbally, but the way that they're behaving, that's what it's basically speaking. And that's what it's basically revealing. يقولون نخشى أن تصيبنا دائرة. Why were you somehow intimidated to rush to somehow get their acceptance, to get, of course, the Yahud and Nasara, and were intimidated to somehow get them to be content over you, to appreciate you, to consider you that you're inclusive, to consider you that you're a place that you are civilized, educated, modern, blah 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 blah. All these different, slogans that they will somehow make you feel that yes, I'm right now included. And you will see, and I've said this many times, I've had more Muslims that would stand against the da'wah and even and I would say stand against even Islam and work against what I had worked in, whether it's St. Catherine University or many other places, more than non-Muslims themselves. Non-Muslims would be considering that we want to be inclusive, and we're going to be I guess giving you the space to say what you feel and to say how you feel about 1, 2, 3. And we're not talking about my own feelings. We're talking about trying to put in Islam, of course. But then who would object to all of this? You would find, unfortunately, some Muslims يسارعون فيهم. Some Muslims would be the ones to rush to show that they're basically adopting the Yahud and Nasara's lifestyle. You would find some Muslims that are, I would say, more ardent and I would say wanting to somehow stick to their paradigm, stick to their idea of what they had wanted to display, whether it's the LGBT, liberalism, secularism, feminism, all these different things. You will see some Muslims, they'll be the ones to rush, and they would think that by rushing towards them, that somehow they're going to get liked, they're going to get appreciated, they're going to appear more civilized, that they're going to appear that they're basically at a better place than the other backward / traditional, of course, other person. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَقُولُونَ نَخْشَى أَن تُصِيبَنَا دَائِرَةٌ. You would come to them, of course, and you would say, well, why are you doing this? Why are you somehow just rushing to get them appreciate what you're doing when you know that that's against Islam? So their response, they would say, well, we're afraid that we might actually get pricked with some kind of da'ira, a calamity. So the word da'ira actually means circle, but this isn't talking about any shape.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Or
Right.
ask.
So this isn't talking about some shape of circle or square or all of that, but no, this is a metaphor to actually, I guess, speak about what they were in fear of. They were in fear of, well, we're afraid that we might go through some calamity, whether it's them coming at us, probably lay us off, probably make us lose our job because of our deen, because they might not find us inclusive enough, or perhaps they basically are not finding us somehow attractive. We might not get the visa, might not get the, I guess, the money for it, not get accepted, etc. So you will see some, they're just rushing to get accepted because what they worry about is they think success goes through them. They think victory happens through them. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَعَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَأْتِيَ بِالْفَتْحِ. It is right there in where it is possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might actually bring the opening. Look at the difference. So you've got al-fath and you've got ad-da'ira. A would be more like it's surrounding in a circle and where it's closing everywhere and you just feel like there's no way out. I'm doomed. My wealth is going down the drain. I lost my job. Now I'm probably going to be homeless. Now I'm probably not going to be able to find an alternative. And now I'm not finding other people to write me a letter of recommendation. The list goes on, and where they would see, oh, that's it. There's a da'ira. It's basically closing up on me. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَأْتِيَ بِالْفَتْحِ, through. And this is not al-fath to actually mean an opening, but this is more of a metaphor in where when you feel that you lost everything, when you feel you lost your schooling, or probably lost your job, or your family is not going what you had expected, everything is just so closed on you, and where you're feeling at that moment that that's it. I've lost everything. This world is becoming a place where I can't move on, where I cannot basically get any type of even breathe any air. It's basically taking me into a moment of nothing but complete anxiety. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَعَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَأْتِيَ بِالْفَتْحِ. It's possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the one to bring about the opening, أو أمر من عنده, or an order from Him. Why an order from Him? Because what actually changes the odds is not necessarily the data that you would find in front of you. What changes the odds is basically the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that changes and has the control of all the different things, whether we're speaking about rizq, provisions, or whether we're speaking about life, guidance, the list goes on and on, health, all the different things that might actually go right or wrong direction. And at the end, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is capable of bringing in a change where He is the one that controls all the matters. فَيُصْبِحُ عَلَى مَا أَسَرُّوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ نَادِمِينَ. But of course, the munafiqeen right there, in where the munafiqeen, they'd end up what they had concealed in their hearts, basically now feeling the remorse, the regret for over what they had run after. What they run after? Well, they ran after wanting to somehow intimidate and to somehow amuse those that were who? Those were that were Yahud and Nasara. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَقُولُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَهَؤُلَاءِ الَّذِينَ أَقْسَمُوا بِاللَّهِ جَهْدَ أَيْمَانِهِمْ. You would see the believers, they would be in shock. Are those the ones that were putting all their effort to somehow swear that they're going to be with you and giving you the support as believers? But now, حبطت أعمالهم. Now they basically were just so blown up, and where they were so blown up, they were thinking that they were somehow getting their path in order. They were getting everything in order, getting to success, that everything's going well, when in reality, they were basically feeding themselves nothing but failure. يا أيها الذين آمنوا. Here's the other hand. Let's look at this one. This one was really scary. O you who believe, when you look at this one, O you who believe, whoever turns away from the religion or from their religion, that is Islam. When you look at this word right there, well, no Sahaba, well, very few. One of those Sahaba that I can remember that left Islam is Abdullah ibn Jarir al-Tabari. Not al-Tabari, but Abdullah, sorry. La ilaha illallah. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry. This is completely, all right. Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri. يا أيها الذين آمنوا من يرتد منكم عن دينه. You had, this ayah is not related to Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri, but this ayah is actually related to the different situations that are coming at the ummah. And it was not common during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Yes, we did have Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri, who was a Sahabi, migrated to Medina and then left Islam and went back to Mecca. And then when the Prophet ﷺ conquered Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ had ordered, because of the warmongering that Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri was doing, he ordered that Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri would be killed along the the very few others, not many, the very few others that were basically warmongering against the Prophet ﷺ. But Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri was actually a milk brother for Uthman bin Affan. He had Uthman bin Affan intercede for him to give him some time. But Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri was standing with Hakim ibn Khuzam, was standing with Abu Sufyan, was standing with others, and he was thinking to himself, I'm not going to say anything, because they were just a group. They were just standing right there, and they were looking at Bilal ibn Rabah go and mount the Kaaba and do the adhan. And one of them was saying, I'm not going to say anything because I'm worried that if I might say anything, that these rocks would actually reveal to Muhammad ﷺ what I was saying behind his back. The Prophet ﷺ, just seconds later, comes over at them and says, this is what you had said. So that's basically what helped. And that was the miracle that Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri had seen right before his eyes. No one was there to go tell the Prophet ﷺ what we had said. And here it is. He just comes and tells us what we had been saying in secret, in private. So that's when Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri becomes Muslim back again. And later, Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri becomes one of the main leaders to bring Islam to Sudan, Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, Mauritania, and Morocco, along with, of course, other Sahaba as well. And of course, at one point, he was actually the leader in Mecca. So you could say one at the other end, what does this have to do with this point? يا أيها الذين آمنوا من يرتد منكم عن دينه, in whoever turns away from the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What that wasn't actually common, but this was a prophecy that there was going to come a time when it was becoming a trend. And sure thing, there was a time where it became a trend to leave Islam. There were two trends. One trend was to leave Islam, and that happened after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, where it was becoming a trend to just leave Islam. The Prophet ﷺ is dead. The second trend was to leave part of Islam, which is at least paying zakah. It was a trend. And many, of course, their Islam was not based on Iman, but based on trends. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them right there, well, if you want to turn away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right there, just keep in mind that the Lord Almighty, He'll basically to Him, there will be people to the Lord Almighty. What do they want? They want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
That reminds me of when the fall of the Khilafah happened, and then they started dressing like the Western people and stuff like that.
Well, there were different trends, Noura, I would say leaving Islam and embracing Islam throughout history. It wasn't just that. I mean, even when you look at before, in where it was a trend to somehow, I guess, embrace not the Mongols, but it was a trend to embrace the Crusades. And then you saw another trend, it was to embrace the colonizing powers, especially in the 1800s. It was to embrace the colonizing powers. And later on, it was a trend to somehow mimic the Western culture, and it became later on a trend. Right now, it's becoming a trend, ironically, to mimic Korean culture. Ironically, at least in some Arab countries, to mimic the Korean culture. It was becoming also a trend in where at one point, 2012, it was a trend in the beginning during the Arab Spring. People started coming into Islam, and then when the Arab Spring, and I would say more when, of course, Sisi and a lot of the different things that happened in the Arab Spring, they basically went in the opposite direction. You had another trend of leaving the religion and basically embracing atheism actually rose by 4%. In countries like Egypt. So every once in a while, you would see a trend of practicing. There was a trend of communism in the Muslim world that was in the 60s and the 70s. It was, I'll tell you, in Palestine, for example, that was the trend to follow al-Jabha al-Shu'iyya, al-Jabha al-Sha'biyya, and all of that. That was the trend. If you're smart, you would actually follow the trend in where you would be a communist. Only smart people would be, of course, that was the way that they proselytized themselves. Only smart people would be communist. Only this, if you're smart, you would be this. And same thing today as well, in where it is basically right now, proselytized in the same way, marketed that if you're an atheist, that means you're smart. To be smart, you had to be an atheist. If you're open-minded, you had to be inclusive and basically support the LGBT. If you're a woman that is independent and free, you would be a feminist. So those trends, they basically go up and down. And of course, that's why الشافعي said, وَلَا خَيْرَ فِي وِدِّ امْرِئٍ مُتَقَلِّبٍ إِذَا الرِّيحُ مَالَتْ مَالَ حَيْثُ تَمِيلُ. That there's no good in the person that they would continue to change every single while due to a trend. And why? Because إِذَا الرِّيحُ مَالَتْ مَالَ حَيْثُ تَمِيلُ. Whenever the wind blows, that is, of course, a metaphor to talk about a trend in a certain direction, they would just go with the flow. That's not being manly. That's not being independent. That's not being strong. Because the second that you're just going with the flow, going with the trend, that actually reflects one thing, is that you're not independent, but you let others think for you. And the second you go with the flow, you're not necessarily being superior in your understanding, because what you're really doing is that you're inferior in where others are leading you without you realizing. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us in where فَسَوْفَ يَأْتِ لَهُ بِقَوْمٍ يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَ. You will basically see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will bring to Him those that would yuhibbuhum, those that He loves, and those that would love Him. How would they be? Well, they would be أَذِلَّةٍ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. You would see that they're very humble upon the believers. Why bring up the whole issue about being humble upon the believers? Because the ones that were really wanting to intimidate, of course, who intimidate al-Yahud wa Nasara, they were really careful to somehow يُسَارِعُونَ فِيهِمْ. They were really wanting to feel that they belong to them, that they are basically part of them, that they somehow are just like them, that they are somehow basically bringing in support to their ideas. They're open-minded. That's how they're presenting themselves. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for the mu'mineen, in contrast to those munafiqeen, for the mu'mineen, they're adillatin ala al-mu'mineen. Whenever they would see the mu'mineen, they're basically what? They're basically humble with the mu'mineen, because they recognize that these are the people that could be competing with me in Jannah. They realize that these are the people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically will love. These are the people that really deserve my support. أعزة على الكافرين. On the other hand, of course, the munafiqeen, well, they were feeling that they were the ones that had the power, that had the authority. That therefore, what would they do? They would basically rush in somehow getting them, that is, يسارعون فيهم, getting the, well, of course, the Yahud and Nasara, somehow accepting them and feeling that, hey, these are part of us. And what they would do is basically they would be extremely, what is the word? But they would extremely act in a way that dishonors them. They would think that by being in that kind of submission to them, that would somehow give them privilege. But what they don't realize, in where al-izza, privilege, honor, authority, power, all comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not from the kafirin. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right here basically displays that a true mu'min, they would love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would love them, and they would be humble with the mu'mineen, and they would be acting in honor when they're with the kafirin. Why in honor? Because to them, they recognize that what they are displaying at that moment, this is not an issue of self-pride. They know that when you're standing, for example, amongst al-kuffar right now, it's not you as a person, it is you and what you carry in terms of iman. That's what you are representing right now. So right now, this is a position of izzah. What you're trying to represent right now is really to honor the religion. So right now, so sometimes, that takes me to the Prophet ﷺ in hadith, where that Sahabi was walking. And of course, the ayah says, وَلَا تَمْشِ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا. The ayah was literally saying, do not walk in the gate of pride on earth. إِنَّكَ لَن تَخْرِقَ الْأَرْض وَلَن تَبْلُغَ الْجِبَالَ طُولًا. You didn't create the earth, and you did not reach the height and of course the strength of even mountains. So why are you walking on such a gate of pride? But that Sahabi understood that there was a context that should be taken in consideration. So when he was in Mecca, he was walking with his back risen, with his head standing tall, and he was walking with the full pride. That's exactly what he was doing. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ had seen this gate of pride, and he said, تِلْكَ مِشْيَةٌ يُحِبُّ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولَهُ. He said, that is the gate that Allah and His Messenger love. Why? Because the context of it was أَعِزَّةً عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. The context during that time, it was to display the honor of Islam at that moment. أَعِزَّةً عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. يجاهدون في سبيل الله. You would say that they're putting all their effort, they're putting, of course, their power in where في سبيل الله, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would not be afraid whether it's a person that might actually come back and retaliate at them. They don't fear anybody coming to retaliate at them. They don't fear any objection. They don't feel any kind of perhaps someone coming at them and probably harming them in any way. That's not what they fear, because they know that rizq is coming from Allah. They know that honor is coming from Allah. They know that power is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not from al-kafirin. So they don't bend themselves to the kafirin. They don't bend themselves to the munafiqeen. And ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ. Now I want you to look at the word ذَلِكَ, because the word ذَلِكَ is supposed to be for something that is distant. هذا is for something that is near. But ذَلِكَ is supposed to be for something that is distant. Why is it talking about something that is distant? Because not many people actually manage to go that level. ذلك, it's a high position that many people don't manage to get there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though it is in a distant place to many, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yu'tihi man yasha. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings it close to whomever He wills. Even though it's far, even though not many people manage to get to that spot, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yu'tihi. It's basically a fadl. It's basically the blessings. It's basically the honor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the one, despite its distance, despite its probably how the challenge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yu'tihi man yasha. Who's man yasha? Is it whom He wills, or whom? Is it the person that wills, or is it the people, or is it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that wills? It's basically both. If you put in al-azima, you put in the perseverance, you put in the will, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will certainly let that will in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring it to you. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even speaks about, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about al-munafiqeen. ولو أرادوا الخروج لأعدوا له عدة ولكن كره الله بعاثهم فثبطهم. If they had really wanted to go, they would have prepared themselves to get there. But the Lord Almighty did not want them to get there. كره الله بعاثهم. He didn't want them to get there. Why? Because they didn't even prepare for it. They didn't prepare for it. They're never going to be whatsoever have the privilege to be blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be there and to be amongst these people. فَثَبَّطَهُم. So He basically got them, ثَبَّطَهُم. Not many people will stay long for a dars, will stay long onto the path, will stay long. Many will hop onto the train, but very few stay till the last station. Many will hop in, but then many will hop out before it even gets to the destination. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Wallahu wasi'un alim. What is wasi'? Wasi', expansive. Wasi', in where the Lord Almighty is basically telling you that He's got vast rizq. He's got vast ilm. In other words, what you're really seeking is an area it might seem like they have the political privileges, economical privileges, social privileges, but you forgot that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gives from His vastness all the privileges. Now, what you need to see in this ayah, in where to reread this ayah, in where what, in other words, it was saying, in where you will see if a person leaves their religion, you will see, of course, this ayah is laying out right here, basically the mu'mineen. But this ayah, this portion of it, is basically right there. I don't want to say incomplete, but it's basically saying, يا أيها الذين آمنوا ما يرتد منكم عن دينه. Oh, right up to here. You want to leave the deen? You want to leave the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to be bringing, in other words, this is more of a threat. You want to leave the deen? Go ahead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring certain people that would love Him, that He would love, and they would love Him, and they would be humble to the mu'mineen, and they would be having the honor. They won't fear. I want you to look at these points. أذلة, أعزة, يخافون, and فضل, يؤتي, all these different points in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling us, well, what the most important si'ah, the most important privilege, the most important fastness that you would get is basically to get one, the akhlaq of being humble, two, the akhlaq of having honor, but you can't get those unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you. Why is it important that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would love me? Because the second that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is loving you, you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to make things easy for you. The second that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses you, what's the opposite of al-hub? Al-bughd or al-la'na. Nas'Allah al-afwa wal-afiyah. So when you're talking about if a person is cursed, what does that really entail? What that entails is that you're going to have a hard life. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not giving you that one, al-huda and al-nur. You're not getting not the guidance and not the light. And what you're going to be really feeling is that there's not even a reminder to help you stay on the path. And that's why you would go into all these different types of illnesses. So this ayah is basically laying out, in other words, those that would turn away from the deen, if we were to say, well, right there, why did they turn away from the deen? Because they thought, of course, this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the mu'mineen. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that I know what you're looking for. Those that turned away from the deen, they were looking for people to give them love, to give them social acceptance. But the mu'mineen, they're seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to love them, not the society to somehow give them acceptance. And what were they seeking? What they were doing in practice, and where those that would turn against the deen, in other words, right there, yusari'una fihim, those that would rush into somehow getting acceptance from the kuffar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling, well, this is a form of ridda. This is a form of going against Islam. To actually rush and wanting the Yahud and Nasara to accept you, it's a form of believing what? It's a form of actually committing ridda, committing something that's getting you out of the fold of Islam. Why? Because for these murtaddeen, what they would be doing is that you would find them a'izzatin ala al-mu'minin. We're flipping here. Because a person that is murtad, they're going to start, whenever it comes to perhaps speaking about Muslims, they'll be, unfortunately, we have a lot of the pseudo-ISIS. We have a lot of this. They'll be taking whatever it takes, whatever time, in order to somehow present themselves that they're not like the rest of the mu'mineen, like the rest of the Muslims, because the Muslims are backward, the Muslims are traditional, the Muslims are this. They would be rushing, these murtadeen, they would be rushing just to present themselves that they can actually find honor elsewhere, that they're honorable people. They're trying to humiliate the Muslims, humiliate anything that Islam resembles and anything that Muslims resemble, and they would be adillatan ala al-kafirin. And you would see that they're so not humble, but they would humiliate themselves with al-kafirin. And yujahiduna fi sabil al-shaitan. And you would see the mu'mineen are jahiduna fi sabilillah. But these munafiqeen, they would be putting all the efforts, they would be extremely active. Whatever that goes against Islam, you'll see them extremely active. They've got all the energy. وَلَا يَخَافُونَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ. You would say that they're the opposite. They would be living in constant fear. So this is only al-mu'mineen لا يخافون لومة لائم. Only al-mu'mineen. But for al-munafiqeen and these kafirin, no, in contrast, they would actually be living in constant fear because they recognize that they're actually not consistent with their principles. And you could see, if this is fadlullah yutihi man yasha, well, that would also be a curse on those that are murtadeen. إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ. Now, coming to that, well, what should be your wali? Verily, the wali for a believer, إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. Your true wali is basically Allah and His Messenger. And those that are believers, what about them? You've got Allah being your wali, Allah being your place of authority, your being the place of victory, and the Prophet ﷺ, and the وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, and even the believers, you're taking them as basically your place of authority, your place of support, your place and sense of belonging is to the mu'mineen. Which mu'mineen? الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ, the ones that would perform salah, that would give zakah, and you would see them in constant prostration to the Lord Almighty. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّ اللَّهِ, and whoever would turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, and from the believers, just recognize this is a threat. Know that the Lord Almighty's basically the ones that would be on Hizb, the ones that would be in the team, in the group that are supporting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those are the ones that are going to be in victory. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Now, turning, what led these people into feeling that they have to intimidate, that they somehow have to support and rush into getting this acceptance from al-kuffar? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, one key thing, O you who believe, don't take those that take your religion as a place of mockery and a place of ridicule and a place for entertainment. Don't take them as your friends. Well, من الذين أوتوا الكتاب. Who are these people? Well, some of them, they might have actually taken the book from the Christians and the Jews, and perhaps wal kuffar, or even general kuffar. Don't take them as your awliya, your place of authority, your place of decision making, your place of power, your place of perhaps your place of entertainment. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. So have taqwa. Make sure you surround yourself. If you're part of the mu'mineen, you're surrounding yourself with those that would love Allah and He would love them. Now, I want you to look at this one. Of course, there's so much detail. This is really just really quick, and what we're doing is that ayah. But here's one thing. When we're looking at il-wali and awliya, what does it really mean? And that's why I thought it would be a good idea to go to this article. It does a good job, and and this is definitely important. And what I like about this is that you're capable of even getting a complete translation. You can go there and get a complete translation, and voila, you would actually see. Oh, this one, okay, it's on a different page. Okay, but you can actually get a complete translation, and subhanallah, it would be really helpful to actually, let's see, didn't want to. Okay, here we go. And we're look at it. Gave you the complete translation of all this page, which is pretty cool. All right, what's the link? Fair enough. So this is right there, and it's an article on Islam Web, a very good website. Basically made that situation really easy. You could actually, like I said, get it translated, even if you get it in Arabic. Let's look at the word wali. They did a really good article, and it would be just a kind of like a fast thing to help us see. Let's see. So we see that it says that these are one of the words that are really pivotal and very common in the Quran, which is the word al-wali. And certainly this word appeared in the Quran in different conjugations, and certainly in where you would see it came in the Quran, in where the word wali, or even in its different forms of conjugation, in 233 different places and instances in the Quran. That's a lot, 233. In 110, it came in as a verb. Okay. And from it is فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَحَيْثُ مَا كُنْتُمْ فَوَلُّوا. Here's the word فَوَلُّوا. When you look at فَوَلُّوا means to turn. Where is the word وَلِيَّ? Well, that's the root of it. And you could say it came in as a form of a noun, even in 123 different instances. Let's continue right there. In where Ibn Faris, who's Ibn Faris? Well, Ibn Faris is actually a scholar who is actually specialized in something called fiqh al-lugha. What is fiqh al-lugha? It's really interesting in where what he was doing, based on the Arabic sound or based on the sound of it, he was capable of helping you see the paradigm in where and how can I, just from the phonics of it, just by listening to it and the harmony of it, how can I get the inspiration to know the meaning for that word just by listening to the letters. So anyhow, it wasn't just that. Of course, it wasn't just the fiqh al-lugha, but it was also going into knowing the words and the meaning, so kind of like a dictionary. And he said the origin of the word waliya, in where what you would see is that what it really resembles and what it really reflects is actually closeness. Closeness? Yes, closeness. So when you look at the word waliya, you're actually talking about, yes, not only authority, but the only thing that you would take in authority is whatever you are feeling close to. That's what he was saying. So it really comes inspired from the word closeness. And he said, and that's why you would say al-wali is basically to mean a person that is close in blood relations, and the things that in where the person that basically is distant and they would turn away, in where tawalla, wali is also when they're tawalla, they turn away. So you could see that it's related to waliya could be something that is close, and tawalla could be something that went far away. So the root is really related to proximity. The whole concept of waliya is relating to closeness, proximity, whether the person is going away or whether the person is getting near. Let's say, so if the person is sitting close, in where yalini or yaliyani, all right, meaning to be close to me. And if a person, of course, would right there would free the slave, they would basically be considered as, well, since they freed them, they were close to them, etc. In where they had freed them, they were called al-mawla. The person that is freed is al-mawla. And certainly, same thing, if we're talking about a friend, a dear friend, an ally, a cousin, a person that is giving you victory, a neighbor, they're all called wali because of their proximity, because of their closeness. This is really, really interesting. Look at that one. And where Al-Asfahani, also a great, actually wrote a huge book. It's called Al-Aghani. Okay, here we go. So he basically said, in where when you're looking at, I guess, the etymology for that word, what you would see is that it's in proximity in place and in proximity even in terms of progeny, or even closeness and proximity in terms of religion, of course, ideology, or even friendship, or of course, faith, etc. So therefore, when you're looking at al-walaya, al-walaya, it basically goes back in where if you're talking about proximity, you're talking about closeness in place, of course, blood, religion, etc. That actually takes us into what gives you victory. So that's what inspires into the word al-walaya itself. What is it really relating? It's relating in where what you would consider as your place, in where a closeness in place, closeness in relationship, closeness in your vision, your religion, etc. And that's why you could see in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Waliyul mu'mineen. He's the one that is wali for al-mu'mineen. He is close to them. He is their place of authority. He's their place, basically, of giving them victory. So you could see in terms of place, the mu'mineen themselves, they're always close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their relationship, always doing the dhikr, always doing the remembrance. They're close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in place. In nasab, yes, certainly, in where we're not necessarily just talking about progeny, of course, and blood relations, but nasab could also be that we're speaking about our sense of belonging. For the mu'mineen, they would feel that their sense of belonging is through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why they would consider that their deen is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their center. So just looking at that, it's just really interesting to just look at the word wali and what it really means. Let's say in the Quran, it basically came in different conjugations, different contexts, different forms. Let's say it came in as to actually mean il-wali as an ally, as the one to give you victory, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about that, إِنَّهُمُ اتَّخَذُوا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Then where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that these people would take shayateen, the devils, as their place of authority or as their place of alliance, a place of victory, and not take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here al-Tabari says إنما ضلوا عن سبيل الله وجاروا عن قصد المحجة باتخاذهم الشياطين نصراء من دون الله وظهراء. What does that mean? So Tabari was saying, well, the reason why they were distant from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically because they went away from the straight path by taking as a shayateen as their place of victory and not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what would they take? Well, they would take their support. Al-Dhuhara is actually coming from al-Dhahr to mean back. What your back does is that it gives you this straightness. It basically gives you the best support. So in terms of course, the non-Muslims or the munafiqeen, they would take as a shayateen as their support. But for mu'mineen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahu waliyyul ladina amanu. He's basically their supporter. He's basically the one to give them, of course, the victory. He's basically the one to be their alliance because they are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anyways. They would recognize it. Let's see, il-wali could also mean the one that is the Lord or even the one that is worshipped. So let's look at this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. And tell them, would I take other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my place of wali, meaning my place of worship, my place of worship, in where when you're looking at al-wali, it goes farther than just being an alliance, but it is basically based on the core of what you consider as your center of worship. The center of worship is to actually be the center of what you regard as your place of vision, as your place of submission. Let's see, il-wali could also mean a son. A son? How is the wali supposed to mean a son? Because through your son, you would anticipate and hope that when you get older, you would get weaker. When you would get older and when you get weaker, that you would have your sons being there to support you in wealth, to support you when your health goes down, to support you when you basically need them there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Prophet Zakaria said, فَهَبْ لِي مِن لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا. Give me from you a wali. What is al-wali? Al-wali is actually a son. Even though, yes, it is referring to a son, but here he wanted a son, not just any son, but the son to be the supporter, the son to be the one to give them at least this backup when they would feel weak and when they would feel old. Let's see, al-wali could also mean a companion, could also mean a friend, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلِيٌّ مِّنَ الذُّلِّ. in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never had any companion. When we're speaking about companion, where he didn't need anyone to basically support Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the wali himself. He doesn't need a wali. He doesn't need a supporter. He doesn't need a companion. And of course, وَمَن يُضْلِلْ فَلَن تَجِدَ لَهُ وَلِيًّا مُرْشِدًا. Whoever goes off track, whoever goes astray, you will never find that they would have a wali, a friend that would be their place of guidance. Why? Because if the person's interests are basically their place of guidance, then don't expect that person to basically be an honest companion. Why? Because if their interests determine their principles and not their principles determine their interests, then this person is nothing but a wild person. Once you become their contradicting their place of interest, they're going to be willing to give up on the principle of friendship, the principle of the relationship, and basically start attacking you right there. وَمَن يُضْلِلْ فَلَن تَجِدَ لَهُ وَلِيًّا مُرْشِدًا. If a person is basically going off track, they're not going to find people to be committed to the friendship, committed to guidance, committed to giving you the right advice. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us how we should find friends. Let's continue. Al-wali could also mean a sanam, could also mean the idol, could also mean their, of course, the pagan, basically the pagan deities and the idols that they might worship and all of that. And where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمِ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ. Do they take other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their place of worship, as a deity? All right. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us right there in where مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ. This, of course, in the context and where he was giving here the parables of for those that would take other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their place of deity. And then he would continue and where كَمَثَلِ الْعَنْكَبُوتِ اتَّخَذَتْ بَيْتًا. It's exactly like a spider or a tarantula taking as its own home to actually be its as taking, of course, its own home where it would continue to weave it, and at the end it would break it. It would basically not realize that it's weaving of something that is completely weak. Okay, let's continue. Al-wali to basically right there be al-qaribu fi nasab. What is al-qaribu fi nasab? To mean the closeness in blood relations. When we're talking about closeness in blood relations, so il-wali, for example, would be your father. Il-wali would be if your father is not there. Il-wali would be perhaps your grandfather, your uncles, etc. So we're talking about the progeny. We're talking about closeness in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَوْمَ لَا يُغْنِي مَوْلًا عَنْ مَوْلًا شَيْئًا. In where on that day, no relative is going to be basically giving giving them support. No relative is going to be basically giving them the victory. That's it. They're right now coming as individuals on Judgment Day. So we're looking at al-wali to mean close relations. Al-wali to also mean the person that is the inheritor. So he said, وَإِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِيَ مِنْ وَرَائِي. Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam said that he was fearing those that were going to be the inheritors. Who are the inheritors? Well, basically there he was worried that these inheritors, that they would take advantage of what he had left behind and the legacy, and they would basically abuse it and not take care of the legacy that he had left behind in terms of tawheed and so forth. So that's why he actually wanted a son. What is that? He wanted a son that is another wali to basically carry on the legacy. But this son, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically said that he's not going to be getting children because he was supposed to carry on a certain legacy. That's it. And let's continue right there in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that il-wali, we could see that it could also mean il-sultan, basically the king, the power, all of that. هُنَالِكَ الْوَلَايَةُ لِلَّهِ الْحَقِّ. In where that is the power, that is basically the ultimate power, the ultimate authority goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is in truth. So those basically are just different meanings in where what does it really mean to have that wali? What does a wali really mean? It means victory, it means alliance, it means basically a relationship in where what it's connected to. It also means the proximity in where we're speaking about different areas, whether it's inheritance, whether it's a close in proximity, of course, in distance or even religion, etc. So just feeling that and just seeing through that lens in where what were the munafiqeen really trying to somehow think of al-Yahud wa Nasara, and why did they actually lose this privilege of being part of yuhibbuhum Allah, yuhibbuhum, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would love them and they would love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here's what inshallah we're going to do. Is it tomorrow? I don't know. But next time, inshallah, we're going to be going over the same page, but we're going to be doing it over with Tafsir al-Qurtubi, because we definitely need to see the different things that the books of Tafsir were saying in relationship to these ayat, because it's important to go deeper in the tafsir. And what I did today was more, I would say, of a very...
Did we get through 55? What are we on now?
What are we on right now? 50, you can consider us on 51 to 57.
51 through 57. Okay,
Mhm.
jazakallah.
Yep. So this is what we're doing. So next week, inshallah, we'll continue working on that at a deeper level, inshallah. And hopefully, if we have the time, we'll probably continue starting on another page, inshallah. Any questions in relating to what we're talking about, or even other subject as well?
I really like this page.
You really like this page? Yeah. Yeah, a lot to say about it. Yeah. So this is it, inshallah. سبحانك الله وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. See you all. السلام عليكم.
Wa alaikum salam.